The tabletop takeaway.
Game mechanics on display.
3 designers share the stage.
Pick a genre and we'll play.
The tabletop takeaway.
Welcome back to the Tabletop Takeaway, to our special bonus episode on social deduction. I'm Ananda Gunaratna.
I'm Charlie McCarran.
And I'm Trevor Muller-Hagel.
/DJ.
/DJ. /Foghorn. /everything. There
Yep.
we go.
So we've been talking about social deduction the last few episodes, looking at a few different games. And I think defining social deduction is tricky.
Yes.
Because there are some mechanics that are similar. Bluffing, trader games in general. There are definitely overlaps, but I wouldn't call all of them social deduction games. And last episode, I sort of touched on briefly the definition of social deduction. But I would say, to me, one of the hallmarks of social deduction is that players have roles, secret roles of some sort. Even if they're not unique roles, generally at least one person is trying to hide what they are, and figuring out what people are is a big part of the game. And then the other important part is that there needs to be some sort of social interaction. And what I was talking about last time is that this interaction often is in the form of a conversation, but it could also be some other type of social interaction, such as shared artwork. Which is a social interaction, but that needs to be the primary driver for the game, as opposed to discrete actions taken based on like different cards that you play or something. Because while you can read some intent into what cards are playing, which is, I think, the main form of interaction in, say, Battlestar Galactica, it doesn't feel at all the same.
It is hard to deduce something when you're trying to pay attention to everyone's actions that they've played for the whole game. It's not really like, I'm suspicious of you because you're acting weird.
Yeah. And it would sort of break down in a bigger game, I think, if you could as easily suss out who was who. Because Battlestar, you don't really, it's not as fun if you figure out who the Cylon is, like, within 5 minutes.
Right.
So I guess maybe that would be more, would you say, more trader game?
Yeah, I would say I would characterize Battlestar Galactica as more of a trader game than a social deduction game.
And you can try to like figure out who the trader is. That's still part of the game. But social deduction is really bringing it to the players at the table trying to deduce the other player's role.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, it's all about who is what.
Yeah.
And finding ways to prove that.
Yeah, and I think one game that I wanted to bring up too is Deception, Murder in Hong Kong.
Right.
Which is an interesting one. I would say social deduction also. You're trying to find out who the killer is, but it's also more, if you haven't played that one, everyone has a series of objects in front of them on the table, and some are like weapons and others are things in the scene of the crime, and you're trying to figure out whose set of cards is the most suspicious. And so the people know, like the people who the murderer was. It's very much like Werewolf. Like there's a murderer and then an accomplice.
Who knows they're a murderer.
Yeah, an accomplice and things like that. But it feels like it's pretty interesting because you're able to see a lot of information on the table, and you're really trying to find the cards that are it, but the people behind those cards have to still like try to bluff it.
Sure.
And point to other people as suspicious. Yeah. I don't know. You've played that, Ananda?
Yeah.
I'm realizing I've seen it at a table before, but I never actually played it.
Yeah.
'Cause that sounds really familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the role of the ghost is what makes that interesting too, because they're silently placing down clue tokens. They get a card and it has like what was the state of the victim's body? And it was like, oh, bloody, or like no marks at all, and things like that. And they're putting down the token on what best fits. And so it's that ambiguity that makes it work.
Sure.
Right. Because they can't communicate outside of placing that token.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was pretty good.
I think there is definitely room for there to be more tabletop-centric games to have social deduction in them. As I know, a lot of them are more trader-focused, but if you are figuring out a way to maybe simulate the like being in different rooms, being able to talk to people if you're in a different room, or trade information that way, that could be really interesting. And still be kind of a social deduction because you're trading information, but maybe not communicating at the table.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's definitely there's room in the genre to really kind of futz with it and play with it. But honestly, the fun for me comes from the social part. Being able to communicate directly and either try to hide who you are or expose someone or have a special ability that allows you to manipulate the circumstance a little bit. There's a lot of room, though, I think, still in the genre. Blood on the Clock Tower, I think, opened it up pretty wide. Which is great.
Yeah, so I guess what do we think when you're designing a social deduction game? What sort of things do you need to keep in mind?
Your audience, absolutely. Because you're going to have different people who approach these games differently. And so being able to, I don't want to say cater, but improve the accessibility, I think you mentioned before.
Right, provide ways for different people to interact with the game if they're not... That's a good point, yeah. Something for everyone to sort of interact with.
And maybe not have roadblocks in the way, like if something requires someone to be a really good something. Like for fake artist, if you had to be a good artist to play the game, it wouldn't be a fun game. Because then okay, well, obviously you're a bad artist, so you're not going to be good at the game. It's like, well, that's not fun. So Blood on the Clock Tower, I think really removed a lot of barriers for a lot of these games. Because Pictionary or, oh God, what was that old game? Not old, but you had the 4 different categories, acting, singing. I don't remember what they all were. Cranium, thank you.
Yeah.
These always felt like, okay, I am good at this one, but not these other ones. So you'd be that thing for that team. So you could find your niche in that game.
Yeah.
So being able to have these opportunities for you to find your niche in a game is really good.
Yeah.
I think that's a good reason to have why it's important to have both the social part where you have to read read people and when you're interacting with them, but also the deduction part where you need information to actually go off,
right?
Even if it's not 100% trustworthy,
right?
That way, people who lean more in one, who tend to prefer social interaction or tend to prefer just logicking things out, both will have something to latch on to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think it's tough when someone isn't good at lying. So I think you need to build in, fail safes where it's well, they even if they're very suspicious, we still might not want to vote on them because of some other thing, One Night Ultimate Werewolf. Maybe they got swapped.
Maybe they're the Tanner.
Yeah. Maybe. Yep. So I appreciate that in games because sometimes when I'm always suspicious, so my meta with my group is that I always act suspicious, even if I'm good. Because,
my first Blood on the Clock Tower, I don't remember if it was the very first game, but it was definitely the first session of games. I was the demon, and we were running it like One Night Ultimate Werewolf, so we were just at a table, and it just worked out well, you're the demon. I'm oh, I don't have any tools at my disposal to refute this. It was the core script. So I didn't really have abilities other than killing people.
You had bluffs, though.
I don't remember having bluffs.
The storyteller didn't... The demon's supposed to get 3 not in play rolls.
That didn't sound familiar when you said that.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
key.
That's actually really important because then even if you're a new player and have no idea what to lie about, the storyteller will tell you, okay, here's 3 rolls. You can claim to be one of these and nobody's going to...
or 2 of them. You can change it halfway through.
Yeah, I mean that's a bit riskier, but
We had a lot of people changing roles in our Blood on the Clock Tower
Yeah.
game with Ananda. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, that's one really good thing about Blood on the Clock Tower is that it gives you those bluffs. So even if you're the demon, you still have something you can safely claim to be without anyone refuting you.
Right. And I think that's super important to have for especially the people who are bad at lying or trying to think up something on the spot while they're lying.
Oh, yeah.
That adrenaline starts going, you can't think. So if you have those things to latch onto and you have your reference material, you can look at it. It's like, okay, that's that.
Yeah.
Great. I'm doing this. It's a worthless ability. No one's going to care if I can do that. Perfect. Done.
And I mean, having other explanations for why information's wrong is also helpful.
Yeah.
Like in Blood on the Clock Tower, if your information's wrong, maybe you're drunk.
Right.
You're not evil if you're drunk. That's,
Yeah.
That's a perfect alibi that anyone can use.
I could have
In
been
games,
poisoned.
not in real life. Not in real life.
I
We're
mean, I've
endorsing
heard
that.
it used in real life too.
But yeah, I think coming back to we talked about creativity in
yeah.
these games, and I think that is key too. Like giving players the flexibility to be creative, like picking from 3 things they could bluff about. Like creativity within constraints, just in general, is a great game design principle. But especially in social deductions, if you can get someone feeling like, oh, I'm being a little sneaky or creative about it, but within constraints, so they don't have like an entire world of possibilities that they feel so lost.
Yeah.
It's strange that the constraints really do help the creativity, and a lot of the times I've noticed some people are hesitant to add constraints to something like this. Like, well, I want them to feel more free, but it's like no, you need those barriers so you can build off of them, right? And so you can make it deeper and more interesting. Because if it's just wide open, that's analysis paralysis to the extreme. No one wants that.
Yeah. I think another thing that's really important is whatever the mode of interaction is, normally conversation, to find ways to encourage players to engage with that right from the start.
Yeah.
Like obviously in Fake Artist, everybody's required to draw a line, so that's fine. But like I mentioned previously in One Night Ultimate Werewolf, sometimes people just don't speak. And that makes the game not work very well when they do that. And Blood on the Clock Tower, I think, does a great job of encouraging people to talk because some people have roles that start with information, and some people have roles that really need to learn what other people know in order to make sense of their own information. Actually, there's this pattern I've seen again and again, which I think works really well, which is the 2 truths and a lie pattern, where you give not literally 2 truths and a lie, but you give a player multiple pieces of information and you tell them that one of these pieces is wrong. And like in Blood on the Clock Tower, for example, the Savant does this. The Noble sort of does this. The Noble is a role that learns 3 players, and exactly one of those players is evil. And just the cool thing about this is it gives players a little objective. It gives them a little quest, right? Because they've got this information, but they don't know which fact is true and which is false. And if they can just figure out whether one is true, or if they can just figure out that one is true or that one is false, they immediately get access to the other one as well. So that's like their reward for puzzling out which one is true. So it's sort of like a lock and key, right? They by doing a little bit of work and getting some information, they can unlock other information. And this works, I think, really, really well for social deduction games.
Oh,
That's
yeah, for
cool.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the entire basis for
Legend of the Boatman. Yes. Great game that Ananda made. Yeah.
So if I may, I want to take a moment to talk about what's happening in China and has been for a few years.
Yes.
Great way to start. Trevor.
A little segue.
Little segue. So I not politically, not anything like that, but game-wise, they are playing games called Jubensha, which translates to script murders. So they have effectively combined murder mystery parties with social deduction and escape rooms into this like new experience where you could go to like an escape room style place, sit down at a table with your friends, or maybe even like go by yourself, and you'll be hooked up with a group of 5 other people. And you will play through this game where you are playing a character, and it'll be for like multiple hours. You have a whole character backstory that's in the script. And you're trying to figure out maybe who the murderer is or solve something, and things will change over time as you discover new information, figure out things about each other, figure out things that are in the space. It seems like a really crazy time. My cousin let me know about this recently, but apparently it's been going on in China for like 10 years or so.
But we may see it here in the
And we
US
may
soon.
see it. They're translating some of them into English, but there's thousands of them.
Okay.
Super cool. I want to try that.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. I will say it's really interesting that a lot of the games are split gender-wise, so that there's 3 men and 3 women in every game. And that's a really fascinating thing, too. Obviously, China's a little different than the US, but it allows them to kind of like, oh, we need someone for this game, so you'll ask someone who is maybe the opposite gender or same gender, and you just need more people for the game. And so it's like it's been encouraging, apparently, Generation Z at like engaging in social activities and even dating from things like this, which is fascinating to me.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just
That's
a
cool.
whole culture now.
All right.
People dress up in costumes, like whole 9 yards. It's great.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
Jubensha, just to say it again.
Jubensha. Okay, cool. Well, I feel like I want to throw out a couple other games that are in a category that I would maybe still call social deduction, but they're a little maybe more on the trader side, and I'm curious your thoughts. Have either of you played Werewords or When I Dream?
I have played Werewords. Yes.
Okay, yeah, Werewords. So
Yeah.
essentially on the surface is like Werewolf, but you're trying to come to a one-word clue that the app you need an app for to give this clue that and everyone, the werewolves see what the clue is, and they're trying to throw people off with misinformation. And it's basically like sort of like 20 questions.
Yeah, that's what it's like 20 questions.
Yeah, you're guessing, you're saying out questions to try to get closer and closer so the group can guess what the word is. But there's no debate, there's no conversations, and at the end you vote on who you think it was the werewolf. But yeah,
Interesting.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely close. Yeah.
Yeah, but then the other one that's made me think of is When I Dream, which is a very similar, if you guys haven't played. One person is the dreamer. They have their eyes closed, you put a little face mask on, and everyone else was looking at the secret word. And half of the team are the good fairies, and the other half is like the bad fairies or whatever. And you give one-word clues around the table. And so it's a little like Chameleon, like you're just giving one word around to try to get the dreamer to guess what the word is with their eyes closed. But since half of the table is bad, it's just a very interesting interaction. And the dreamer doesn't vote on who they think is bad. They just have to come up with the word. So they have to figure out who to trust among...
And the good fairies and bad fairies know who's
they
good
can
and
see.
bad. Oh, that's funny.
Well, I don't know if they know right away, but they clearly figure it out once people start giving terrible clues.
Right.
And you start laughing, and you're like, oh, no, this person...
that's a really... I hadn't heard of that one.
I'll have to give that one a try.
It's very fun.
That sounds pretty fun.
So that might be also in the more trader game role, or... It's hard to say. They're all fuzzy definitions here.
Yeah, and it is hard to get really ironed out when you're talking about broad categories like this, because as I was saying earlier too, it's a very big Venn diagram with a lot of overlaps that are pretty substantial. Trader game, social deduction game, there's probably going to be a trader in the social deduction game more than likely, unless it's something else. I'd be very curious about games that are fun and don't have a trader, but are a social deduction game. I don't know what that would look like, but I would be interested in trying that.
I mean, what's that 2-player one? Inhuman
Conditions.
Inhuman Conditions.
Oh yeah, we talked about that one.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that would qualify as a traitor because it's just
I
like
guess if it's a 2-player game, it's hard.
Yeah, because you're just finding out whether or not this person is good or bad. So
right. Yeah,
that is interesting. I want to.
yeah, because there's no real sense that you're on a team, right? It's like one person is interrogating the other one.
To see if you haven't played it, I haven't either, but it's like the
I'd
game
like to-
Blade Runner. Interviewing possibly an android, and you don't know whether or not they are based on the question how they answer.
Yeah. It's really interesting because it's a 2-person. I would classify it as a social deduction game because the whole game is just talking.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
I did just have a thought, so bear with me.
yeah.
What if you are a group of like families at a masquerade, and you're trying to figure out like maybe who's your family or who's like you're trying to get information from? That could be really interesting. I was just thinking like
So like,
but you
there's
wouldn't
not
have
an
an
evil team. It's just trying to
but you'd have different teams around who are trying to gain more information or
that seems
convince
fun.
other people that they're in a different family, so they'll give them information. Yeah,
Yeah,
that sounds fun.
I make it.
All right, I'll make that.
Yeah.
It sounds easy.
I mean, you said you wanted
Yeah,
to make a social.
I did say that.
Yeah.
Oh no,
That sounds pretty fascinating.
great.
I think, yeah, so maybe we're moving into the segment of like, how would you
Incorporate
incorporate
this,
this? Any thoughts on what you do?
I mean, so I think I guess my big takeaway from all of these is that social deduction I see as being about sort of the interplay between information and trust. And you need both of those things together to make that work. If it's just trust and there's no information, you've got something like Mafia, which can get old.
Yeah.
And if it's just information and no trust, you know, like you can, by which I mean that you can reason out everything from the information,
Right.
then it's not really a social deduction game, right? It's just a logic puzzle. And I think the really cool thing that social deduction does compared to other logic-y games is that you have information you're reasoning about, and you have to assign a level of trust to each piece of information. Like, how much do I trust this?
yeah.
How much do I trust the person who told me this information?
Yep.
And how can I reason out the solution to this puzzle based on all these pieces of information that may or may not be true, but not in a probability. I mean, maybe in a probabilistic sense too, but also in the sense of this information came from this person, and if I can't trust this person, I can't trust this information.
Right.
And the information may also point to which players I can trust. So the interplay between information and trust, I think, is key to social deduction, and so it's really important to get that balance exactly right.
So the real question is, how do you do that?
I mean, I think Blum the Clock Tower is a pretty good model.
It really is. I agree with that.
Like mechanics like drunkenness,
Yeah.
where, you know, the storyteller can lie to someone, but there are restrictions to how they can lie, and part of the information that you can reason out is who may or may not be drunk or poisoned. Mechanics like powers that give information that isn't completely direct, or that comes with a cost. Like, for example, the grandmother gets very clear information. They start knowing one other player's role, a good player's role, but the cost is if that player's killed by the demon, the grandmother also dies.
Oh.
So they can absolutely go and talk to that person, and it's actually a great excuse for them to do so because they want to tell their grandchild as soon as possible. But they have to be very careful about how they do it, because if the demon learns that, you know, that's their grandchild, that's an easy 2 kills.
Right. Oh man.
So just always having a cost to information, either a cost to information or some plausible vagueness for the information that might explain why it's wrong.
Okay.
Like a reason aside from that someone's lying. Also ambiguity with information, such as types of information like the chef learns how many pairs of evil players are sitting next to each other, which is extremely useful information, but without context doesn't tell you that much.
Sure.
And then the context is what you have to figure out from the rest of the game. And also, like I said, information given in the form of lock and key puzzles, where you have several facts and you know that some number of them are true, And by figuring out which ones are false or which ones are true, you unlock the usefulness of the other facts.
That's fair, yeah. Yeah, and that makes... Because if it's a lock and key where two people hold both sides, then it feels really good to form that alliance with that person.
Right.
And so, like, you're able to create that relationship, even if temporary. Like, oh, great, we figured this out. Awesome. And then you might find out, like, I can't remember. I think I was teamed up, with someone who had that with me. Then we found out we were both poisoned.
By
And
me.
we were both, by Charlie.
They were
that's right.
sitting right next to me.
Yep.
Yes.
And I decided to swap them and then poison them.
Yeah. Which was great and ridiculous, and it worked really well.
Yeah.
That was partly me not knowing what to do, and then it turned out to be a weirdly
Just enough
effective
chaos.
strategy.
Yeah. So I guess maybe one way to summarize it is contingent information.
Yeah.
Where the information hinges on, or the usefulness of the information hinges on other information, as opposed to just being useful like by itself. Like, for example, in One Night Ultimate Werewolf, the seer gets information that is just plainly useful.
Right.
Right? There's no ambiguity to it. There's no you might be wrong. It's just, I know what this person is, or I know that these roles are not in play.
Although it's nice to have some of those roles, like when you're playing the game, like I always enjoy getting a seer card because you just feel powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But someone could still
Make you a werewolf.
throw you off and
but-
swap you.
But that's where you add a grandmother-like cost.
Yeah, sure.
And so absolute information, but with the mechanical
With the
downside.
costs. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, personally, this has reinvigorated me to work again on the social deduction game I had, which has a pretty unique hook, I think, which I won't reveal yet because, I hope to make it soon work. I've tried many versions of it.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. It came to me in a dream.
Oh.
Actually, I've had a few games that came to me in dreams. But yeah, one of the premises that I want to get is that there's two teams, and it's sort of team deduction, social deduction, and I think this One Night Ultimate Werewolf having that timer also made me think back to this idea I had where, okay, I'm going to try to do a short timed game rather than my first attempt, which was any length of time, but nobody said anything because my roles were way too complicated. So yeah, that's the other thing I think is key for social deduction. The rules, maybe the roles can be a little complicated, but the rules themselves of how things interact should be pretty simple.
Yep.
Yeah. Or explained through an app or the storyteller or whatever.
And the abilities should probably be like 7 or 8 words at most long instead of a paragraph or like multiple sentences. That'd be good.
Or if, Blood on the Clock Tower audience, is like someone who signs up for Blood on the Clock Tower knows maybe what they're getting into. It's quite deep.
I mean, the descriptions of the roles are fairly standardized and generally pretty clear, I think. Although some of them do need some clarification or just some context for certain mechanics.
Yeah.
Like madness, for example.
Yeah.
I never quite got the hang of madness, but it was a really cool mechanic.
Yeah. I don't think we talked about that. Madness basically requires players to act a certain way or they might be executed.
Which is weird. It's a little fuzzy rule there.
Yeah, I mean, it's fuzzy, but it enables for some really cool things to happen. But it can also be a bit awkward because the storyteller has to make the judgment on whether or not someone is appropriately mad, which sometimes feels bad when you have to execute someone.
Well, you're not really that mad, so
Yeah.
bye.
Yeah, well, any last thoughts on social deduction?
Fascinating genre to work on for this. I really enjoyed it.
Very difficult to make social deduction games.
Yeah.
Yeah. Clearly, they're fun to talk about, too.
Clearly,
Yeah.
They create a lot of stories.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say they do a very good job of keeping people engaged all of the time.
Yeah. Large numbers, too.
Yeah.
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 And they are very entertaining to watch.
Yep. And like you said, great stories and memorable experiences. Is like, I can think back to my favorite game of this.
Right.
Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great.
All right. Well, tune in next time for a whole new genre of games. And, well, yeah. Check it out next time.
Thank you for listening.
Hey, thanks for listening to The Tabletop Takeaway. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. So please tell your friends and visit our website at thetabletoptakeaway.com, where you can suggest games and mechanics for us to cover next on the show.